Welcome to the 7th episode of SteeleWatching, which is a podcast for Remington Steele fans. My name is Sara. I'm one of the hosts.
And I'm Eric. I'm your other host.
And we're going to be talking about the episode Etched in Steele today, which is an episode that I particularly really like. It first aired on November 19th, 1982, and was written by Glenn Gordon Caron. I don't like his name. And directed by Stan Lathan. And so for this episode, I looked at the TV guide listing from, the book that we have, Judith's book, and I found it really amusing, so I'm using this one. Laura thinks a best-selling sexy book author killed her own husband until she discovered it was the woman's insipid spouse who wrote the books. I really like insipid spouse being put into this TV guide listing. They're really good with their adjectives, I've noticed. So kudos, TV guide from 1982.
Can you imagine having a degree in English literature and then being hired by TV Guide to write their episode synopses?
And they're just like, we have a word count, people. Cut this down. You don't need this many adjectives. But, he is kind of insipid. So I think it works. But the other thing I noticed when I was looking at the production synopsis for this episode, an interesting fact that I read was that the name of the author was originally Constance Knight and then changed when the episode aired to Charlotte Knight, which I think kind of fits more of the persona that they were going for. So I just wanted to kind of put in a little bit at the beginning here. To start off, the author Charlotte Knight is clearly inspired by real-life author Danielle Steele. So I did a quick Wikipedia deep dive and found some interesting facts about Danielle Steele. I don't know if you want to oblige me here, but
tell me.
So here's the thing. I didn't know anything. Like I knew that I saw her books on my mother's bookshelf when I was younger. That was it. I freely admit I have never read anything by her. Does not appeal, not my type of thing. But I do think when I started to read, she was born August 14th. This is from Wikipedia, so nothing really super in-depth, but she was born August 14th, 1947, and she is the 4th best-selling fiction author of all time. So she's sold over 800 million copies and written over 190 books. And because this episode deals with ghostwriting, I remembered reading somewhere that a lot of really big authors, when they get big enough, they hire ghostwriters and they stop writing their own stuff. And I, for whatever reason in my head, figured, okay, well, surely she's ghostwriting or has a ghostwriter now because she has a book out, 2 books out, 3 books out. There's always books on the shelf by her. I Googled it. She has never had a ghostwriter. And not only has she never had a ghostwriter, but she has written 190 books, including over 140 novels. She comes out with like 2 to 5 books a year, something crazy like that. She also, and this is also of note to the episode, she has written all of her novels on Olympia SG-1 standard typewriters since the episode kind of comes undone via the realization of a typewriter. Mm-hmm. She still writes on a typewriter, which she bought secondhand for $20. And she's actually been on the Guinness Book of World Records, or in the Guinness Book of World Records, for having a book on the New York Times bestseller list for the most consecutive weeks of any author, 381 consecutive weeks at that time. So just a couple of really interesting things I did not know. And the other interesting thing that I didn't know was that she's been awarded a ton of awards for mental health and the work that she's apparently done in mental health, including a Distinguished Service Award from the American Psychiatric Association, Service to Youth, Outstanding Achievement for Adolescents, Larkin Street Youth Association, and a bunch of other things, California Hall of Fame, and all due to the fact that her son unfortunately committed suicide. So she created a fund and she basically funneled all kinds of mental health resources to gain more recognition for children's mental health. So just random stuff on her because the episode features so heavily on the type of books that she was known for writing and is somewhat not too complimentary about them in a way. I just thought it was kind of interesting to kind of put that in there. So that is completely non-Steele related, but I thought it's kind of Steele related. Danielle Steele, Remington Steele. But if that's kind of all I had. If you want to get into the episode. It's more than I ever knew.
Okay. More than I knew either. I do have a question about the title of the episode. Maybe I'm just being dense, but what does the title, Etched in Steele, have to do with the plot? The only thing I can think of is printing and the idea that printing plates are etched plates, but that doesn't, I mean, that's kind of a stretch.
It's a big stretch. Yeah. The killer is revealed for having used a typewriter, but that's not really etching. It's typing.
No, it's not.
And the Mitch Knight used recordings, like he dictated. So
yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess etched implies writing, but why not say written in steel?
Yeah, exactly.
You could use, yeah.
Or steel in print.
Yeah, you're right.
Something like that.
That would
I like yours better, but yeah.
Yeah.
I just couldn't make the connection. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I've honestly never thought about it until you mentioned it. So yeah, yeah.
Okay,
so we have that.
What questions have you got for me?
Well, the opening scene, we've got this shot of a disheveled man, which we find out later, of course, is Mitch Knight, reading this manuscript, gets very angry about the end, starts ranting and raving up at the bedroom, and then it pans into this shot of a woman, Charlotte Knight, huge hair, makeup to the nines. She's in this crazy satin, I don't even know negligee
nighty
thing?
Nightgown, whatever.
Makeup, full face, nighty. She's smoking. The bed sheets are satin. This is clearly a lifestyle that they're trying to portray, like right from the get-go. Something the 80s audience would understand. And I think this is probably the most overt reference to the kind of Danielle Steele oeuvre of novels. Not just her specifically, but these sort of lifestyle novels that were very appealing. Do you think she's smoking in bed for one. I don't see an ashtray anywhere near her. Do you think modern audiences are going to get this sort of lifestyle reference the same way, or is this one going to go straight over people's heads?
I think most people are capable of understanding it. It's not necessarily something that would jump to mind and be as readily identifiable and associated with that whole genre of life now as it would have been back then. I mean, because it's not the kind of thing that we see on TV.
Yeah.
There was that whole atmosphere back then of this. And so it was a fairly common thing to have represented in the media. Not so much anymore. So I think people can recognize it. I think people can understand the reference, but the understanding of it is a little bit more tenuous than it would have been back then.
And it's also, we would look at this and see maybe something that is specific to an era. Back then, this was considered sexy. All of this, the satin sheets, the nightie, the smoking in bed. I look at that and I go, okay, well, you're going to ruin your bed sheets. These fancy schmancy satin bed sheets you have, you are going to drop that cigarette. Or you're going to drip your ashes or whatever. Like, plus smoking gets you cancer. Just stop. Nothing about that to me implies sexy. But at the time, this was the image that they was being sold as sexy. The big hair, the makeup, the satin sheets, the smoking, everything. So I just I think you're right that they would recognize it, but not necessarily have the same connection back to it, because that's not something that we would see now in TV as being sexy. It would be a fire PSA.
Yeah.
Right? It'd be just put your cigarettes out. This is how you lose your bed.
And I think your choice of words there, that was how it was being sold. I think that's really a good and appropriate choice of words, because personally, I never thought of that sort of thing as being sexy or even being desirable.
No.
I'd like to have the money. I'd like to have the nice apartment, not necessarily in a high-rise building. I've got this thing about being up in the air and, looking down and
I don't want to be up 35 floors.
The whole being well off. Yeah, I could go for that. But this whole satin sheets and smoking in bed and the I was going to say the sexy lingerie, but I don't have a problem with that. But just the presentation of it in that manner, it never appealed to me. That was not That was not anything that, and I don't think it was, I don't think it necessarily appealed to as many people as were convinced it appealed to people.
Yeah.
I think Hollywood had this idea of this is what people want and this is what we're going to sell them. And it's people are out there saying, okay, well, if that's what you're going to give us, then that's what we'll take. That's what we'll watch. But that's not necessarily what we're looking for. But anyway, that's Hollywood.
It's true. So we switch over to the office. Things are slow, apparently, as they ramp up to Christmas. The bit with Murphy needing help for his crossword is probably one of my favorite parts of this episode. When he calls in, I need a 10-letter word for lexicon. And then Laura sort of patiently saying, did you look it up? Yeah. Dictionary is very funny. One thing I did wonder, though, Bernice says she's worried they don't have any clients. She asks, how long does this usually last? Implying that she's never seen this Christmas slump, whereas Laura and Murphy are kind of used to it. They seem to have expected it. So Laura claims things are usually slow at Christmas. Is she referencing her time at Havenhurst here, do we think? Is that how she knows things are slow at Christmas? Or because we get the impression that Bernice started the agency with them, in which case she would know that theoretically.
Yeah.
Or I might be overthinking it.
It does imply that Bernice has not been with Laura and Murphy in any capacity prior to the beginning of that particular calendar year, because if she'd been with them either at Remington Steele Investigations or at Havenhurst or at the Laura Holt investigations, which was, in between, she would have been there during a Christmas and she would know. So yeah, you're right. That is an interesting question.
In which case, that makes me wonder about the job interview, because I can just imagine, we're interviewing for this. First of all, you need to sign this non-disclosure agreement that says you are not going to talk about anything that we discuss here in this interview because, we need a secretary. And by the way, we've invented a fake boss that you cannot admit is not real. Sign here. Well, I just think that would be a very interesting job interview.
Well, it would be if it went that way. My vision of it would have been something along the lines of, if she hadn't been working with Laura or Murphy or the two of them for any length of time, that would explain her lack of knowledge about that. But she and Laura could have been friends for a much longer period of time. And, so Laura said, look, here's the deal. I had this private investigation business that I started, and it's just not working out. So I've got this idea. Murphy's on board with it. You know Murphy, right, Bernice? Yeah, you've met. So here's the plan. I need a secretary, somebody I can trust who won't spill the beans. Are you interested? That's how I envision it, based on what we know right now and based on your question.
I would love to. And based on your saying that, I would love to know Bernice's backstory. I really wish we'd gotten, because we get a bit of Murphy. We know that Laura and Murphy knew each other at Havenhurst and they were friends. I really want to know, where did Bernice come from? And unfortunately, we don't ever get that, which is a shame because she's I think
we do get a hint of it in that first episode, though, in the premiere episode, not the pilot, because she says, remember me? I'm the party girl. So there is a hint there that they do have some history.
Yeah, true. That is true. And Laura, obviously, her lamenting she would give anything for a nice juicy murder, but she doesn't seem terribly worried about the lack of clients, so they must be paying the bills perfectly fine. Her expression when she sees the photo and caption of Steele with the publisher, he writes, when I get through with him, he won't be able to read. Where is Dostoevsky? And she storms out. Love it. One of my favorite scenes.
Well, my in my notes, what I wrote down is that where she says what I wouldn't give for a nice juicy murder, my sub-comment was, does her murdering Remington Steele count? Because that's exactly what I had in mind, is that, yeah.
Well, it would be, yeah, because she gets so angry. And then, one thing I found odd, and I find odd about this episode, is that, and it's ironically the thing the plot hinges on, is why Mr. Steele would want to write a book on his 10 most famous cases. This feels out of place given how little his involvement in the agency actually is at this point. The cases he's worked on so far have either been by accident or he's been pulled into. It's funny. Laura's response to it is hilarious. You don't have 10 famous cases. You don't have 10 cases. But it feels like something he would do a bit later on, because I struggle to think of what he would get out of publishing a book at this stage beyond the notoriety he already has. Like, what is he actually going to talk about when he actually doesn't have any famous cases?
Well, here's the thing. I think you are approaching it from the standpoint of he had the idea to write the book. And I don't think that's probably what happened. I think Forsyth. True. Forsyth is, I mean, we find out about him, and let's admit it, he's a bit of a con man in his own way, I suppose. I can see him going to Remington Steele and saying, hey, you know, I'm looking for some good books. You're a detective. You're famous. This would be perfect. So he gets something out of it. He gets a good book that he can sell for a lot of money and make a lot of money on, or he thinks he will. And Steele is going to get the notoriety that he deserves as a world-class, world-famous detective. So I imagine that Forsyth sold him on the idea. And Steele, being a bit of a patsy, I guess, in some ways, he just falls for it.
Yeah. I wonder if he also did it a bit to get Laura's attention, like a child would do to get their parents' attention, but not knowing how to go about it in a positive way, because he must have known how she was going to react to this. He couldn't have, I don't think there's any universe in which he would think, oh yeah, Laura will think this is a great idea that I'll get a book published all about me, you know?
Do you really think he even thought about it that far in advance, or gave it any thought? It was just like somebody came up and they wanted him to do something. And it's like, oh, really? Oh, yeah. And then afterwards, then it's like, okay, so now how do I justify this?
Yeah. And then, of course, we get the hilarious switch to him in the smoking gown in his apartment. Is that what it is? The smoking jacket?
I think that's what that's supposed to be, yeah.
I assume it's this weird, yeah. And then he's narrating his, quote, book to someone. We never see her again, so I assume that she was probably sent over by the publishing agency. And, of course, this is one of my favorite. So I'm going to take a moment out here to say that I had to read a lot of Charles Dickens in school, and I read Great Expectations and A Tale of Two Cities in high school, and then when I went to university, I had to read Hard Times and Dombey and Son, both for the same course, the 19th century Victorian novel or whatever it was, and I had to read like 9 novels, and that was 2 of them. Dombey and Son alone is 900 pages, so I have a love-hate relationship with Charles Dickens. He got paid by the word, and so of course he was exceedingly wordy, and Steele is sitting there narrating his, quote, book with the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities, saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And then the woman that is doing his, taking down his dictation, she interrupts and says, shouldn't it be it was both the best and worst of times, which cuts out 2 words. And he says, oh, yeah, absolutely. It's much more economical. And I'm almost certain that was a dig at the fact that, Dickens did not need to use that many words in his books. So I just love it. I think it's hilarious. Great little kind of insult there to...
Well, didn't she recognize the line?
It looked like it, yeah. Yeah. You'd think anybody would, because it's clearly one of the more famous literary beginnings of books, I would think. But then, of course, before they get any further... Laura storms in.
I haven't had 10 most famous cases. That's where she hits him with that.
How dare you? And the minute she just says, how dare you, he oh, you need to go. He dismisses this woman, gets her out the door. Planning a career in fiction, are you? And his attempt to persuade her, especially his comments on franchising, mulch comes to mind here.
I had it written down too.
I don't know if you thought of that. Did you? Yeah. I figured you would have. So I have 2 questions for this, though. When he goes on his little rant about seeing Remington Steele offices in shopping malls, he says, think of it, Laura, whole families going to the mall, buying sneakers, picking up snow tires, leaving clues. Why the heck would anybody be buying snow tires in California? First of all, there's my first question. As a Canadian who owns I have to switch my tires every time it gets below, I think, -7 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but does anyone in California own snow tires? Why would that get a reference?
Somebody in Northern California might, but certainly not, I wouldn't think, in the Los Angeles area. When's the last time LA had snow?
Yeah. So that was just, I thought that was random. A random thing that maybe the writer put in without thinking about it. I don't know. And then the second question, why? So I have a few theories about this, but why is Laura so angry about the book? Is it because it's a book that is celebrating her work and, of course, putting his name on it? Is it something else? But technically, he's right in the sense that it could bring in more clients. So is it's I'm wondering why is it because he's getting that recognition extra, but he's already getting it? I don't know. That one I kind of went back and forth on a little bit.
Let me preface my response by asking this question. What cases would he write about? Okay.
This is what I wondered.
He's going to have, it's or Laura said, what are you planning a career in fiction? He's going to have to make stuff up.
Fiction.
He's either going to have to make stuff up or, as you said, take her cases and put his name into them.
Yeah.
I'm thinking she's fearful that it's going to be the first, that he's going to make things up and
okay. Yeah.
Even if they take the cases that actually happened and stick his name in it, there's the possibility that that's going to backfire and it will damage the credibility of the agency. And I think in this one particular case, she might actually be, if she were to have said, I'm only thinking of the agency, Murphy. I think in this particular case, it would have been true. This one case. Never, ever any other time when she said it was it true. But in this case, I think it would have been true.
Any other time, it's a bit of a line. But
I think it's all about the reputation of the agency.
I wonder, too, if she's worried that if they fly too high, that they might come under the radar of law enforcement, tax evade. Like, we know that she doesn't file a tax return form. Yes. We find that out later on. So maybe she's worried that if they become too well known, then it could potentially, technically what she's done is illegal. So,
well, not necessarily illegal.
There's that
wouldn't
element
think.
too.
I mean,
I wonder.
You can create a false identity as long as you're not using it to defraud people. And I suppose somebody might claim that there was some fraud involved in this, but there's a lot of made up, I don't want to say spokespeople, but made up characters who are supposedly founders of companies or whatnot that they've never existed. The companies don't get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, she probably doesn't want too many people looking too closely at Remington Steele because it's a house of cards. The whole thing would collapse if somebody starts picking at the the cards and start pulling them out. At some point, you're going to pull out that wrong card and it's all going to collapse. And I think that's what she's concerned about as much as anything else.
The integrity of their agency
and hers,
goes with it,
personally.
I guess, because it's her hard work. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, okay, that makes sense. She's very angry about this. So she insists that they go to this party because he mentions he was invited to a party. What time are you picking me up? Which I found quite cute. And then, of course, we get the scene change where Laura and Steele are in the car. She asks who's going to be at the party. And when he mentions that it's being held to celebrate the completion of a new manuscript by Charlotte Knight, you can see her whole face just perk right up. She tells him that every thigh is creamy white, every breast is full and heaving, and men don't caress their women, they seize them. And yeah, she's read those books. She's read every single one of them.
Well, and then she realizes what she's saying, and it's like, no, I've never actually read any of the books. I've just heard about them.
I've never actually. I don't know. It's kind of, and they mention that later on too, because Mitchell later on says something along the lines of, it's sold 80 million copies, but nobody's read them, sort of thing, which is a bit like Nickelback albums in that respect. You know, they sold a bunch of albums, but really, does anyone admit to listening to Nickelback? I don't think so. But it actually makes me think of the entire genre as a whole, because I don't know if you've heard this story, but do you know who Diana Gabaldon is?
No.
So she's written the Outlander books.
Did I just ruin the story?
No. Well, no, that's, I imagine that maybe not a lot of people know, but she wrote the Outlander book series, which is now a major television series and is, hugely, hugely famous. She wrote them back in the 80s. And the first book came out, I think, in 1980 something. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But when she essentially wrote the books initially, she had meant it to be a book set in the 1700s. And that was that. Her leading character was supposed to be an 18th century woman. She kept talking like a 20th century woman. So she said, okay, fine. I guess if I can't get my character to behave, I will make it a time traveling novel. So she had her character be a woman who travels 200 years back in time and meets this, Scottish man, and they end up getting married and a bunch of stuff happens. It's very historical, over 1,000 pages. The book itself was never meant to be a romance novel. There was a bunch of genres sort of mishmashed into one, but at the time, the idea of general fiction wasn't a category in bookstores. So when she went to her publisher, they basically said, all right, we'll publish it as a romance novel. You'll get 500,000 copies initially printed. And she said, but it's not a romance. Like, there's romance in it, but it's not a romance novel. That is not the genre. It's, she had a PhD. This woman had meticulously researched every bit of historical data of this time period. And she didn't want to be sort of pigeonholed into, quote, a women's fiction category. The publisher said, fine, we can put it in sci-fi, but you'll only get 50,000 copies. And so she went, well, okay, fine, 500,000, it goes in the romance section. But this kind of makes me think of the way that this particular genre is kind of looked down upon, because Laura talks about, every thigh being creamy white. She clearly loves these books. Why is it such a bad thing then that she admit to loving these books? This genre sells, as they say in the episode, millions and millions of copies, and yet no one admits to reading them.
I guess maybe the association with the trashy novel. You can have different books in a genre, and some are well written and not exploitive. Of either the genre,
true,
of the readers, or anything. They're literature type books. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is the trashy novel. And you can have those in romance. You can have them in science fiction. In science fiction, they were called
for sure,
pulp novels, I think. So pulp, I think certain genres get stuck with labels that they can't overcome. And so if you get stuck in that genre, you get stuck with that label, whether it's deserved or not, for that particular, well, actually, I was going to say for that particular work of fiction or work of whatever it is. But even the entire genre may be unfairly labeled with it. So I think it's just the association. It's the supermarket checkout type books.
That's fair. Yeah. The Harlequin. And interestingly, if you look into Harlequin, which I can't remember why. I think it was because we used to, for fun, sometimes we would buy like the really, really bad ones and read them out loud and just have a field day laughing at them because they were just so badly written. But we looked into what does it take to get a Harlequin novel written, and actually it just has to be 50,000 words and it has to meet a few parameters and you can submit it unsolicited. So there's your answer as to why those books are usually bad. But I think you're right in terms of being pigeonholed into a trashy or not trashy. But even with a show like Remington Steele, the assumption is that the focus is always on the romance between the two characters, that there's nothing else that the show has going for it. And that's complete crap, I think, in my opinion. There's so much else that the show has, layers and layers and layers of allusions to old cinema, allusions to literature, allusions to the comedy, the slapstick, everything else that goes with it might sometimes get ignored over the charisma of the two leads and the will they won't they storyline. So I kind of wonder if that runs parallel sometimes.
The will they won't they storyline is very formulaic of a lot of television, and that's what a lot of people respond negatively to, is the formulaic aspects of different things.
Yeah.
And again, it's like the classification of romance novels as trashy novels. It's as much a reaction to the formulaic, churn it out, cookie cutter type
Yep.
approach to things as it is anything else. So
I think that's fair.
that's my response.
And then you've got, yeah, okay. Laura and Steele, they come into the party. Knight's husband is getting drunk. Laura immediately wants to find Forsyth, get out of there, cancel the book. Steele reminds her that she needs to pretend she works for him, which had to have been a painful moment where he kind of pokes at her a little bit. Forsyth walks over, and of course, Steele does not cancel the book. He listens to Forsyth yammer on. Laura walks away to go find him, bumps into Mitch Knight, introduces himself. When she realizes who he is, again, her face lights up. You're married to Charlotte Knight, the man behind the woman, which turns out to be extremely true. And Steele correctly identifies Laura as the woman behind the man. She almost admits to having read all of her books, stops herself beforehand.
Well, no, she does. She does. I mean, she gets to that point,
Yeah.
and she says, it's a real pleasure. I've read all of, and then stops. It's the cat's out of the bag. I'm sorry.
And of course, the look on Steele's face. Yep. It's like catching her in like a hand in the cookie jar moment,
And that's when Mitchell Knight says,
something he
yeah,
can
and that's when
tease her
Mitchell Knight
about.
says the line that you referenced of, don't be embarrassed. Nobody admits to reading Charlotte's books, but they sell 3 million copies. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, of course, he does the whole bit on the balcony. They're 35 floors up. He did his description of Charlotte, which turns out to be from the book itself. The gardener, his name is Tony. I don't want to go too far ahead, but this show really likes buff dudes named Tony. That's all I'm going to say. And the titles of the books, I don't know what you made of them, but I giggle every time I hear them. Twice Nightly, Bated Breath, and of course my favorite, Prone Positions.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of title that these somewhat sensationalist books would get. I mean, that's what they would title.
Yeah. For sure. And then of course he tells them that he thinks he describes this chapter he read and how it has him falling 35 floors to his death. Laura says, well, did you go to the police or can you leave her? And I can't leave Charlotte. So I don't know what I can do with you. And his comment about, yeah, you're right, it's a bit premature, is a little bit implying that I guess I'll have to be dead before you'll investigate it. And then, of course, he dies.
Surprise. Who saw that coming?
Ouch. Yeah.
No.
Nobody saw that coming. Total shock. And the chaos here is really good. Laura's really shaken by what she's seen, which I thought is an interesting reaction considering how many dead bodies they've seen already. It was a bit odd that she seemed pretty shaken up. And Charlotte's agent comes over, introduces himself to Steele. He doesn't even look at Laura. The first thing Steele says to him is Laura Holt, forcing him to acknowledge that she's there. And the look on her face, pure resignation, irritation. This has happened a million times, but it's a good moment for Steele, who almost forces the agent not only to look at Laura, but acknowledge her as a professional. Why do you think he did this? Earlier, he wanted to write a book taking credit entirely for her work or for fictionalizing it.
I don't know. Maybe it's a preemptive move to shift the blame a little bit because, I mean, after all, she was pretty much the one who turned down Mitchell as far as helping him out.
True.
So I don't know.
I wonder if it was one of those rare moments of self-reflection and realizing that he's maybe pushed her a little too far, especially after a big tragedy, because they were there. He was kind of pushing her buttons, not canceling the book, which she had demanded that he do. And then this thing happens.
And he didn't even try. He didn't even try to cancel the book because, as you were saying, Forsyth was
no, he didn't. He stood there
saying, "Well, why don't you guys go get drunk, and then once you're drunk, I'll come back and we'll hammer out the deal." And Laura says, "Well, I don't think he got the message." And what message? Steele didn't even try. So it may be a little bit of he kind of got him into this situation, and now Laura's kind of in a position where she might have some responsibility for it because she was, like I said, the one who essentially turned Mitchell down. And had they taken some slightly different course of action, he might not have been dead. And he's uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, his agent, Charlotte's agent, implies that Mitch was an alcoholic who was obsessed with his wife. Laura is immediately suspicious of this death. And anybody, I think, would be. The editor says that the fictional death scene Mitch described isn't in the book, hands her the manuscript, which Steele tries to fob off the situation and starts to do what Laura asked him to do and turn down the book. And then, of course, she steps on his foot, stopping him. Poor guy. He ends up, she must have really done a number on his foot. I wonder if she was wearing heels.
But, she's right in the sense, and you're right, that anybody would be suspicious, because the reason those rails on those buildings are that high up is so that you can't accidentally fall over them. You have to try.
Yeah. And I think it's odd that nobody thought of suicide to begin with, considering he was apparently so miserable. Like, nobody mentions that as an answer. It was an accident. Well, I don't know of any police, as you said, any police officer, investigator worth their salt who would take a look at that balcony and go, oh yeah, you could totally accidentally fall off that.
Yeah, they wouldn't.
You'd have to climb up it.
Yes.
So it, but I'm wondering, like, she's clearly curious about his death. She's suspicious for sure. And I get that business is slow, so I'm assuming that's why she pursues it. They have no client, but at the same time, I wonder if it's just, as you said, the guilt that's motivating her. If she had done something, if she'd said something.
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple of different factors, because, and this may speak to your question of why didn't anybody consider suicide, is because if you're going to commit suicide, I would think that you wouldn't broadcast it in the way that Mitchell Knight did. This is how it's going to happen. And then it happens exactly like he predicted. And of course, he said that he read it in the book, and then it happens. So that doesn't sound like something that somebody who's going to commit suicide would do. I mean, to say that it's in a book, it just doesn't seem like a suicide type situation. I mean, unless he's really he really wants to destroy somebody's life, and so he commits suicide and tries to make it look like they killed him, which is a popular plot line in some mysteries. But it just doesn't. You just wouldn't do that. You say, hey, look, they're trying to kill me. This is how they're planning to do it. And then it happens. And then, it must be suicide. That just doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, I think you're right. You wouldn't, if you were trying to do a cry for help, so to speak, you would just come out and say it, or you'd leave it maybe a note, but putting it as a book, like this was a chapter, and then asking for help, it's a weird situation all around. And then I think a lot of it is guilt. I think Laura's feeling like if she had listened to him or said, yes, let's go talk about it, or something, that maybe he wouldn't have gotten pushed over. And of course, she says the next day to Steele, as he's icing his poor foot, that she can smell it. She smells a murder. And Steele doesn't believe there's a case. Leads to my absolute favorite line in the entire episode, his comment of, did you see the look in that man's eyes? He's seen a lot of shows that aren't listed in the TV guide. I don't know why, but that one, it's a rather dated joke now, but still funny if you remember TV guides. But the strangest part of this episode, I think, aside from Steele wanting to have a book about cases he hasn't actually done, is that he doesn't suggest he and Laura go away together. He suggests that all four of them go away together. We know he wants to get Laura alone. We know he has romantic interest in her. We've seen that in the previous episodes, but it's interesting he would push for the whole team to go away together. I'm wondering why you think I have my own theories, but I'm curious, why do you think he suggests all four of them go away?
Well, we know that business is slow. And if it's that slow, it may not harm the agency much to just close the doors and have everybody take a couple of weeks vacation. And if he's trying to get Laura in a romantic situation and she's resisting, she is wary of going somewhere with him because of that, safety in numbers. Well, let's all just go as a group. And if something just happens to happen between us while we're out there as a group, I mean, it's all so innocent, but if it happens, that's where I think he was going with that, but I could be wrong.
Fair enough.
What was your theory?
My theory, I think what you're saying, part of it I agree with for sure. He's definitely hoping for some, oh, look, we're all out as a team building exercise, but look at this romantic restaurant. Let's go here. I think as well, though, we've seen hints at episodes in the past where he's shown himself to be lonely, or what seems, the episode where his date cancels on him and he's going through every single name he has in his little black book, or just other incidents where he seems to involve himself when he doesn't necessarily need to. We don't know how many people he knows in LA or what connections he has, but he doesn't seem to have a life outside of the team, right? So I wonder if this is more than just he wants to be part of the team. He wants to be let in on the inner circle. He doesn't want to be the guy left out on the sidelines. And even Murphy is part of that team. So he's willing to, he doesn't seem to be terribly antagonistic towards Murphy. It's the other way around for sure, but he seems almost affectionately, he pokes at Murphy just as much as he pokes at anybody else, but I don't necessarily think I think he's lonely. I think he wants some friends.
What you just said there led my mind to point A to point B to point C, D, and I wound up in a totally weird place that seems to have no relationship to where I started. You know how those goes. And I'm thinking,
buckle up.
Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
I know. How did you get there?
They all dress in red and green and end up in some little small town where people make maple syrup for a living. Go on.
I mean, that would be the plot of it, but it's that Hallmark movie. Yeah. Oh, Christmas is never a fun time for me. I always had such a bad time at Christmas when I was a kid, or, whatever. I've got bad associations with Christmas, so I want something to distract myself. And so let's all just go do something.
Yeah.
And then Christmas happens and
Christmas could be pretty romantic. Just saying, like there's, chances for stuff to take place.
Well, but even if that's not the motive, the Hallmark movie premise would be that he's just unhappy with Christmas. And so he's surrounding himself by people to distract him, which is kind of what you're saying there, but different motivation.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that later on in seasons ahead, but there is a Christmas episode and he's not exactly Mr. Bells of Holly. So yeah, I think that could be it too, that holidays are tough, right? So you want something to distract, and Laura is obviously looking for something to distract her, taking on this non-existent case. So this could be both their ways of coping with holiday stress. Murphy comes in, asks them to keep it down because he's trying to sleep. Murphy is pure gold in this episode. The moments that he has, which are few and far between, are really good. And Steele says that he plans to prove Laura doesn't have a case. And this is a moment where he tries to sort of use Murphy as an ally.
Yeah.
He kind of grabs him and he says, like, look at her. What do you see her doing? And poor Murphy doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He kind of backs off of it and he runs away, actually. I think he says, like, can I leave now? When they start fighting. And so he basically says if he can prove that there's no case, they go to Jamaica. And he's going to get his hands on everything Charlotte Knight has ever read. And when she asks how he plans to do this, he says, Mrs. Steele, his mother, taught him it never hurts to ask. Which, sure, okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we switch over to Charlotte's apartment. He finds her with Tony, who is 50% of his scenes are shirtless. This is one of them. She's got something equally revealing. She does not seem sad at all that her husband is dead. She's completely unapologetic. The way they sit down on the couch, very intimate. And she asks if she makes him nervous. Why do you think he actually is nervous? Like he's not committed to Laura in any way, shape, or form. They don't have a relationship. There's nothing that would prevent him from sleeping with her. And she is kind of his type from what we've seen before. So why is he so flustered with her behavior?
Is it that, or is it that he's got a mission in mind and she's trying to redirect him to something else that isn't his mission? And that's what's irritating him, because he's there to ask for her work, the copies of everything she's written.
Yeah. Well, and also how she writes it.
I think that's more of a pretext to get to the point where he's getting copies of everything that she's written. And of course, the ultimate goal is to get Laura away from the office with him. And so, yeah, I think it's just a matter of she's trying to redirect the conversation in a direction that he hadn't intended and wasn't wanting to go. And so that's what he's responding to. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it for sure. It's an odd reaction considering this is the guy who spent $20,000 on Nadine.
Well, here's another thing though. Steele, he's kind of a classy guy. And even though he does some things that are kind of sleazy at times, he's not at heart really a sleazy person. How sleazy would it be to make a move on a woman who's just lost her husband? Even though she's not she's obviously not all that upset about it, it would still be kind of sleazy.
And even though he doesn't believe there's a case, I guess she could be a murderer too. So
I think it's as much the fact that he's thinking, no, that's just not right.
Moral compass intervenes.
Yeah.
Her reaction to him asking how she writes.
Very well.
You really are here for business. She's totally baffled by the fact that he didn't show up to sleep with her, and which I find also very amusing, because that's clearly why every man shows up at her door. And so you really are here on business. Oh, okay. And I think this is also another question. Why does she give him all of her tapes? Who would do that? I mean, does she have copies of them all? Like, if she doesn't, that's literally all of, like, that's I don't know. I find that very odd that she just kind of gives him a bag full of, oh, here's all my tapes. Have at it. Especially since it's the new book, isn't it? Like, here's my unfinished work that's not in stores yet. I totally trust you not to flog it somewhere or sell it. Like, it's a very strange thing to do.
But, hey, if they didn't do it, they wouldn't have a point for the plot. So
that's true. It is in service of the plot for sure, because of course the next scene, Laura shows up at his apartment. She's ready to read the papers that she thinks he got from Charlotte. And of course, there's a couple of interesting things about this. Laura's story about her calc professor. She hints at an affair that she had with her college professor when she puts the glasses on. So the teacher in me is completely grossed out by this story entirely. But one thing I wonder about this is she doesn't need the glasses. If she never needed the glasses, why put them on here?
Why is she wearing them now? I had that written down as well. It doesn't make sense unless you view it from the standpoint that if it worked on the calc professor, it might work with him. And then, of course, plausible deniability. Well, I wasn't coming on to you. That's right.
It was the glasses.
It's the librarian look that everybody, yeah.
The glasses did it.
It's the sexy librarian.
That reminds me, did you watch Bones?
Yes.
That episode of Bones where they're on the plane and he walks up and he's like, take your hair out and, toss it around. And she's like, why? She does it. And he's like, never mind. He walks away.
Put your glasses in your mouth, chew on them, the sexy librarian and say that book's due back in whatever. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. I was trying to remember exactly what it was. And she's totally baffled by it. Does it? But
that's the only reason I can think of why Laura would do that here, is that she's wanting him to go for the sexy librarian fantasy thing. And she has plausible deniability.
Yeah. And I mean, it hints at the rule breaker part of her personality, the part of her that is absurdly passionate, as is, later on described in a future episode. And we sometimes see, and it, maybe also the woman who reads Charlotte Knight novels and enjoys.
I was going to say that earlier. Yeah. I mean, the fact that she reads these and is so excited to meet Charlotte Knight and is so enthused that she's even willing to admit something that nobody else will do, that she's actually read the books. Yeah. It kind of hints at this other Laura.
So I think you're right. That all kind of plays in together. And she looks cute in the glasses. I think they work for her. I can see why it worked on the aside
Nothing
from the sorry, the teacher cringe, but yeah, the rest of it I could.
I've never bought the line. There was that old line, guys don't make passes at girls who wear glasses. I've never understood that because I think a lot of times.
Is that a line? Is that a thing that gets said?
Well, it used to be. Used to be. Probably not anymore, but I never understood it because if they're the right glasses, hey.
Yeah, I mean that those cat's eye glasses that Lisa Loeb wore for the song "Stay I Missed You," like those became a huge hit in the 90s, and every girl was wearing them because it was like that cute alternative girl look. So glasses work. Just saying.
I don't think cat's eyes would have worked for Laura, but I think the ones she was wearing worked really good.
Yeah. Well, and that was very period accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Like the big glasses in the 80s were very popular. So they start listening to the tapes. Why did they start with chapter 7? Does Charlotte not label her chapters?
It was the first one they grabbed.
But I don't know. Her organizing and filing system is terrible. You would think A, the tapes would be labeled chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and B, you'd think Steele would look for the first one. Why would you even want to listen to a book middle of the way in?
It is kind of an odd thing to do, but who knows?
But I think it was also probably because we needed to hear that bit or something.
It was the same line that Mitchell and I used in describing Charlotte. Which, that should have been a clue. Hello, somebody.
You would think, because he obviously he claims to have read it in her latest book, and you would think as well the fact that they were given a physical manuscript at the beginning, and now he's been given a bag of tapes, and he's told that she doesn't actually write her books. Why did nobody remember that there was a physical manuscript typed,
and that the line he was saying was straight out of that book?
Yeah. It's like the Toodaloo all over again.
Just right there in plain sight so that you overlook it.
And Steele doesn't believe there's a case. So there's maybe an excuse for him. But Laura, she should have noticed because, again, you're right. That's exactly what Mitch says on the balcony right before he's tossed over. So, it should have been that should have clued in. And then, of course, they have difficulty listening to the tapes, which foreshadows some of the scenes later on in Love Among the Steel. But it's interesting that it's Steele that's uncomfortable with it. He turns off the tape a second time, and she's amused by it. Like, the look on her face is pretty, she's not bothered by it in the slightest. Obviously, because she's read all these books already. She knows exactly what she's in for. Why do you think it makes him uncomfortable?
Maybe it's a little bit too close to what he's feeling.
Could be. Do you think, because she says, what do you think you're protecting me from? Do you think he sees her as somehow less, sexually adventurous?
More innocent?
Because she hasn't slept with him? Because, I mean, he knows that she's lived with a man.
But she may still be somewhat innocent in this other aspect of life and relationships. And so maybe he thinks he's protecting her from something that would shock her.
But she's read all the books and he knows that.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. But, it does seem like that after they turn the tapes back on again, because she goes through, I think this is where she goes through the story about the professor, the calc professor. It worked. And then they turn the tapes back on. And at that point.
It worked, yeah.
From that point on to the end of the scene, my impression was that Laura was starting to get a bit uncomfortable. I may be reading that wrong, but
it might. She did. There was a couple of. She gets out of popcorn. She starts to, and again, I'm going to point this out. This is Couch Watch, second time. Why are they on the floor? His couch is comfortable. Sit on it.
I don't know. You got this thing for sitting on the floor, don't you? For not sitting on the floor. Yeah.
Oh, so. From a practical standpoint, for Mr. Steele, he wants to get Laura all snuggled up. The floor is not the place, my friend.
That's true.
You get her on the couch, she falls asleep, she's in your arms. I mean...
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It just... I don't get it. I don't know. Maybe he's afraid of messing up his furniture. He doesn't want the popcorn to stain it. Who knows? But... So they listen to the tape, And you're right. I think eventually it does kind of look like she's slightly uncomfortable as well. And then they both fall asleep listening to the tapes, which of course allows the batteries to run out. The tape goes into slow motion. Steele's there's a lot of references to his mother here because he wakes up and he says, "I'll be there in a minute, Mother." What was he dreaming?
Who knows?
Genuinely curious and how coincidental it is that they woke up the exact moment I think it was here they wake up to the moment where Mitch
the line that Mitch
narrated.
said that you're right. I was wrong on that earlier.
But either way, they wake up to that. And then of course, that's when Laura puts 2 and 2 together on the books themselves that Charlotte never wrote them, that Mitchell wrote them. He describes when they go and sort of confront Russell about it, he describes how he purchased the manuscript, and he says that out of Mitchell's mouth it sounded like pornography, but out of hers it sounded like erotica. So once again, we have a scenario of characters creating a fiction to sell something. We've seen this 3 times now. We got this with Ratui, we got this with this episode. Even Laura's mother makes a comment about creating a fiction about someone. This is something the show seems to keep circling back to. Do you think it's because it's in the first season and it's kind of trying to reassert what the show is meant to be doing, or just cheeky ways of inserting this whole idea of creating something out of nothing?
The whole premise of the show is that this guy doesn't exist. He was a fiction created by Laura. And so, yeah, I think you're right that it definitely is something that they can keep coming back to in different forms to just kind of reinforce that whole nothing you see is real. Everything you see is fake. And the people aren't real. They're all fake. And moreover, these fake people are going to create other fake people to fake out the other fake people that these other fake people created. So, yeah. Yes.
Lots of fakes.
So, no, I think you're right. It's just something that they keep coming back to because it works so well, not only within the context of the episode, but within the context of reinforcing the basic premise.
And you've got, for this episode, the premise is... So for the entire show, Remington Steele, the premise is that they're, a woman trying to make it in a, quote, man's profession. So she creates a fictional man to do that, right? In this episode, it's a man trying to make it in a, quote, woman's profession, i.e. romance novels. And so he gets somebody to be the front woman for his novels. Do you think the books would be as popular or as successful if people knew that a man wrote them? Is Russell right that out of a man's mouth it's pornography, out of a woman's it's erotica?
There is probably some truth to that, yes, because it's the perception of the motive of the person doing the writing, of the fact that stereotypically men are just sexist pigs and all they want to do is hop in the sack with a woman and just, get everything that they can from her. And then, why buy the cow when you can just get the milk for free? So
love the cliche, all of the most horrible cliches in one. I get what I know you don't actually mean. It's just kind of funny to hear but
no, I think there is that perception, and certainly probably more so in the past than there is now. And then in the reverse, it's somehow more acceptable for women to have that because, that's what women do. They go to the hairdresser and they just talk about their sex lives with their friends, while they're under the dryer getting their hair. That's the perception. Yeah.
In the rollers.
Right. So, yeah, I think it's right in terms of the accuracy of it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I think, too, if you look at perception, if you know that a man has written it, and as Laura described, right, every thigh is creamy white, every breast is full and heaving, women don't caress, or men don't caress their women, they seize them. If you are looking at that as being written from a woman's perspective, then it reads more as this is a fantasy written by a woman, and this is what a woman is saying that she wants. But if it's written by a man, like you said, there's that perceived idea of sexism and that perceived idea of oh, now it's not glorifying women, it's objectifying, right? If every thigh is creamy white and every breast is full and heaving. So it could come across as, you know, oh, you don't want to caress women. You just want to seize them. You, as you said, you sexist pig, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I think it all comes down to perception and how we look at these genres and these, you know, pieces of work or whatever you want to call it. But it's interesting because Laura immediately understands, and she says, we understand the problem better than you know. But she, of course, is still convinced that Mitch's death was a murder, so they go back to the office, and this is where they have their fight. And, you know, Steele accuses Laura of being a workaholic, claims that she's afraid of having time on her hands because it might mean she has to get close to some of the people she works with, i.e. him. Do you think he's genuinely angry in this scene, or is this just another act to try to get her to go to Jamaica?
Hang on, let me find that part in the... This is the one I think you're talking about. It drives you crazy that there are no mysteries to solve, no clues to ponder, no suspects to suspect.
Yeah.
I think he's frustrated with her. I think that's what's coming out here is he's frustrated with her. He sees all of this case and everything that's going on right now as her way of avoiding dealing with him, dealing with her emotions, her presumed feelings toward him. She's trying to bury herself in work. And I think that's what he's upset about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And Murphy, I heard fighting, so I knew Mom and Dad were home. And yet he just has some really great lines in this episode. Obviously he's amused watching Steele and Laura argue about being a workaholic. It probably nothing pleases him more than to see them fight. She gets genuinely angry with him, storms out, and he says, "Last chance, go away with me." And I think you're right. I think there's the moment of truth. She hesitates, she falters. You can see in her eyes that she's looking for an excuse or a reason not to go. And I think you're right. She's using work to avoid him. She's using it to avoid thinking about what she might have, you know, what feelings she might have for him. And downtime to her is a bad thing because it means that she has to think about those things. So I think this is a genuine argument. I think it starts out maybe on Steele's part as being a bit contrived to try to steer her in a specific direction. And then I think as he gets on a roll, he becomes more genuinely hurt that she's doing everything she can. There's no client. Nobody's paying them to do this. This is entirely Laura, her own curiosity, her own determination to prove that she's right. And of course, he's gone along with it to a point, but now he is feeling like she's doing this to avoid him. So.
Yeah. And I think all of that frustration he's feeling about her putting up all these roadblocks and her being unwilling to acknowledge that maybe she has some feeling and her ambivalence, even in what she does say, it's all coming out and he can't address it directly either. I mean, he's playing just as much a game of avoidance as she is because he's blaming it all on the lists and the paper clips stacked in the drawer, whatever it is that he's hollering at her about. Those are all just covers for his unwillingness to address the issue head on. And then when he does, it's still more of that, let's just run away and have fun at the beach type thing. It's not, he's afraid to express what he really feels in a serious way. So he's got to be flippant. He's got to be, I was going to say suave, but it's not the suave. It's the not really sleazy, but just kind of the more crude approach. Not totally crude, but just
back to the let's hop in the sack.
And not quite that crude, but more of the let's just have some fun. And who knows?
We don't know where it'll go. Who knows?
Date Mike from The Office. He wants to be Date Mike because he doesn't want to be serious Mike.
Yeah. I like that.
Sorry. We should probably not use so many other TV references, but I mean, that's.
Bones. We've got.
Yeah. People are going to get educated about a lot of other TV shows just by listening to this.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel Steele, right. Charles Dickens. There's Diana Gabaldon. We've had it.
Yes.
We've run the gamut here. But then we've got, so Laura, obviously, she storms off. She goes to Charlotte's apartment to look for evidence. Tony is there again, shirtless. I guess the heat in that apartment.
Do you know what you're looking for? Well, physical evidence.
Yeah, he definitely flusters her in the same sort of way that Charlotte flustered Steele. And it's funny. And Tony claims to be an Ivy League gigolo, which I found an amusing way of describing himself. But he tells her that he's a Harvard graduate, and he claims that Charlotte has been mentoring him on a novel. Why would he ask for Charlotte to mentor him when he knows that she's not the writer? I mean, we know eventually that he is the villain and he wrote the third book, but he's clearly there writing his, quote, serious novel. Is it just a comfortable place to hang his hat? Or Charlotte is clearly not mentoring anybody. She can't write.
It's not really that she's mentoring him in writing. The exact line was, a mutual friend introduced me to Charlotte, and she's been something of a mentor. It's a euphemism. It's not that she's mentoring him in writing. It's that he's mentoring him in other things.
Gotcha. She's mentoring him in... Gotcha. Okay. Wow, that flew right over my head. Usually I catch the euphemisms. That one I missed.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, then.
That's okay. You're forgiven.
You learn something new every day.
Yes. This is an educational show, people.
He did write prone position. And I guess we're not supposed to know that at this point. So, yeah. He's using her for work research. Yes. Makes more sense.
Yes.
That's why he never has a shirt on.
Or she's using him for...
Yeah. So then he suggests that Mitch's death was a suicide. This is the first time that option has been put on the table. And Laura accepts this explanation. She seems satisfied by it. And I kind of wonder why. Why is she satisfied? Because you pointed out earlier that it's a silly way to announce your... I guess if you're planning to do something like that, it's a weird way to do it. And it to me feels kind of odd that you would announce it before you. So, why do you think she just sort of accepts that and she seems content with that explanation?
I think, and this, I didn't write this down in that context, but I think it fits this context of your question. Tony, when he's talking about it being a suicide, says, in his own mind, Mitchell Knight was a very accomplished man, except no one knew it. Can you imagine what it must have been like working very hard, but having someone else win the plaudits? Yes, she can. That is exactly where she is at this point.
Obviously.
And has been since Steele walked in, or actually since she created Steele, even before he walked in. That's exactly where she's at.
For sure, yeah.
I think even though there's still sufficient question as to what actually happened, I think it is him hitting that line with her that it destroys everything else that she's been thinking up to this point, because now she can't get past this because she's living this.
True. Yeah. And I mean, obviously we don't think that Laura would ever come to be that depressed, but I think you're right that she can understand how this man got to be so depressed when all of his work was being attributed to somebody else. Yeah, for sure.
She's got to be feeling that frustration, maybe at a lower level than Mitchell Knight was, or than is being attributed to Mitchell Knight. But she's feeling that, I'm sure, all the time.
So she goes back and Steele shows up to admit that he does think that there's a case. So for some reason, he's jumped on board there is a case train. Why do you think he suddenly is on her? Like, she says, I don't smell it anymore. And he says, aha, but I have. She's saying, let's go to Jamaica. Why is he fighting her on this?
I think it's because he did the research that she didn't. He was listening to the tapes. And on the tapes, Mitchell Knight had writer's block. So now all of a sudden, okay, we know that Charlotte Knight was a fake. Okay, they've admitted that. It's not a big deal. But now there's another fake behind the fake, because if Mitchell Knight had writer's block, he didn't write the new book. So who did? Why are they still lying to us if there's nothing to, it's why would you try to hide something if you got nothing to hide?
So is it natural curiosity, do you think? Because technically, if he had ignored that knowledge, he could have been like, oh yeah, there is no case. Let's go to Jamaica. I've got 4 tickets booked.
If he hadn't stumbled across that tape of,
like, he could, he didn't have to tell her.
But if he hadn't stumbled across that tape, he probably would have said, okay, here's the tickets. Let's go. And he would have let Loris admit that there was no case. But I think it's that, we've talked about it before. He's got the instincts. They're not honed. They're not trained.
Yeah.
But he's got the instincts. And I think it was just the discovery of that tape where he's got writer's block that it triggers something in his mind. And he says, wait a second, there isn't something right here. And it could just wind up being nothing, but there's still, as he said, in order for there to be a case, there has to be a mystery, a circumstance, or an occurrence that remains unexplained. Now, at that time, he was arguing the other side, but now he's come across something that there's a mystery. There's a circumstance and an occurrence that hasn't been explained. And I think that makes a difference for him.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. And of course, he plays part of the tape, references The Shining. This is another, so maybe you can help me here as a person who was not an infant in the 80s. Well, actually, this movie came out before I was born, but he says to her, did you see The Shining? And she says, did anyone see The Shining? I'm confused. Kubrick is probably one of the most famous directors of all time. Was this not a hit at the box office? Like, did people not actually go and see this movie?
I didn't see The Shining.
I think they did.
I'm not into that genre of movie, but I did, because of that line, I did do a little...
See, I love horror movies.
I did do a little research into it, and I found on a website called Den of Geek. And
Den of Geek. I love Den of Geek.
They have an article there about The Shining, and according to them, the movie had a $19 million budget, but only grossed $44 million. That's not a huge hit.
No.
Yeah, it was only a moderate commercial success during its theatrical run, and was on the whole seen as a disappointment by audiences and critics alike. It didn't find favor in its original release, with many in the wider critical community sniffily, yeah, that's what they had written there, concluding that it was just a silly ghost story and beneath the talents of the director. So, yeah, it wasn't.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it was more that it was beneath Kubrick to even lend himself to it.
Yeah, because it was just, it's just a silly ghost story is what they're saying here. So why would you do that?
Right. Which is kind of funny, because this whole episode seems focused on dismissing genres of work as, oh, it's a silly this or it's a silly that. So
yeah, and they went on to say that this was reflected in The Shining becoming the only one of Kubrick's post-1960 films to not receive a single Oscar or Golden Globe nomination in any category. Not that he just didn't win. He didn't even get a nomination for it.
Wow.
In fact, The Shining's most significant piece of contemporary recognition was to earn the filmmaker a nomination for Worst Director at the inaugural Golden Raspberry Awards in 1981.
Ooh.
So yeah, it was not well thought of.
Ouch. Okay. And I know Stephen... See, I didn't know that part of it. I knew Stephen King hated it. He felt that it completely destroyed his book. And I've read The Shining and I've seen The Shining. So I can say from both perspectives that the film does not in any way sort of represent the core of what Stephen King wrote. In the book, the character that, goes insane is a very meek, very mild sort of man who he hated the casting of Nicholson. He felt Nicholson had too much violence in his face to begin with. That the transition of Nicholson going to, becoming a crazy, man trying to kill his wife was too easy to be believed. He wanted somebody who was less believable to go on a killing spree. So I knew that King didn't like it. I didn't realize the rest of the general public didn't like it. So that was I guess a pop culture reference that Laura has that would have been very relevant at the time. But given the amount of sort of, the film is, I think, maybe viewed a bit differently now, but.
Yeah, I think I read something somewhere when I was doing the research that it has since become something of a cult classic, but yeah, apparently it was not well loved.
Yeah, I mean, they made a sequel to it, which, I mean, came out fairly recently. They made Dr. Sleep, which had Ewan McGregor in it, and was a sort of sequel to the book and the movie. It was, anyway.
Yes.
So back to the episode. Laura and Steele go back to Charlotte's place, where they have gathered Russell, Charlotte, Dennis at the party that Steele has insisted they put together. And his flair for the dramatic. He is such a drama queen. This is reminiscent of earlier episodes, which they have all the suspects for dinner and tempered, or he accuses them all until, of course, Laura steps in and reveals the killer. Only this time, she has no idea who it is. So it's hilarious to watch him go through every single potential suspect, find out that he's wrong, expect that Laura will jump in if he embarrasses himself. And then when he kind of like slides over to her and says, okay, who did it? And she's like, I don't know. I told you, I thought there wasn't a case. So,
well, she's been in this position before where he's off and running and she doesn't know who did it. But once he starts going down his wrong path, that sets her up for knowing what it is. But here he's gone down every single path that he can go down and nothing's turned up. And she's still not. Yeah, you're right. She's still not got a clue. And the thing that comes to my mind is the line from not Eric Idle, but one of the other Monty Python guys about grabbing the wrong end of the stick. And that's what he's doing. I mean, he's just he's beating at everything, and nothing's falling out, and it's embarrassing. And
oh yeah,
once again, she lets him just run off and run wild, and doesn't do anything to try and stop him. I don't get her.
This one's a bit different too, because as you mentioned, with the other two examples, she at least had an idea. With Tempered, she made the motions of going through the tea situation because she had an idea. And with Still Waters Run Deep, it was the same thing. She thought she knew what was going on with Ratui, and he comes in with the empty chest or whatever, and she kind of lets him go off because she's, as you mentioned in the other episode we recorded, that she suddenly has a bit of doubt. Oh, he's got this thing. He says he knows where George Kaplan is. So in both those cases, she had an idea, but this case, she has no idea. So you're right. Why the hell does she let him go off like that? Especially since when he's done and he says, okay, who did it? She's like, I don't know. Like, you've basically made an idiot out of yourself in front of all these people. Maybe she was kind of hoping that him making an idiot out of himself in front of Forsyth would kill the book deal.
Could be. Could be. Well, especially once he accused Forsyth. It's not just that he embarrassed himself, he accused Forsyth.
Yeah. He's like, this isn't going well for your book deal. Could be she just thought, okay, well, this will torpedo the deal and I won't have to deal with it.
Very well, could have been.
But then, of course, she kind of inches to the side and sees Tony in the room typing. And that's when it clues in that he had said to her earlier that he only ever types. And, of course, we know Charlotte, quote, Mitch, whoever dictated the books. So she kind of makes that connection between that written manuscript that Mitch had said he read and puts her plan into action by saying, oh, no, we'd love to do a book deal. They go into Tony's office to get Russell to sign the book contract, obviously hoping to catch him. Laura uses her charm to get Tony to offer to type up the changes. My question here, he sits down and he just starts typing. If they needed to add extra clauses and they've only just come up with this idea on the spot, where is he typing from? Like, what is his source? Wouldn't somebody need to say to him what to type? Because if it's already written down, why would they need to type? I'm confused.
Yeah, because he's typing off of some other document. So he's reading something.
Yeah.
Maybe it was something that was handwritten.
So if they've already got some other document typed up, then
maybe it was something that was handwritten.
Maybe. I mean, they obviously got that done pretty quick. But
yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that.
And it's Steele here who figures out Laura's figured out Tony did it. Steele, though, he figures out his motive, which I find really interesting because she's figured out that he wrote the third book. But it's Steele that kind of fills in the blanks as to why he would kill.
Mm-hmm.
He's a serious writer. He doesn't want to be associated with this trash.
But it would be profitable trash.
Yeah, it would be. But again, I think this goes back to you saying that Steele has at least the instincts for it, however unrefined. He makes an idiot out of himself in front of the party goers, but when it comes down to it, he's able to fill in the blanks and he knows what's important, even if he doesn't know why. So I think that was a good moment for him. And then, of course, we get the tag scene for this one. She coming in. I love this tag scene. She comes into his office pretending to narrate a steamy chapter and then stands there and kind of proudly says, "You know what I'm doing? Nothing." And it's very cute. It's very playful. It shows, I guess maybe, I'm wondering if you got the same impression, like it shows kind of like a genuine friendship that's being built at this point. This sort of like, look at me, I'm doing nothing.
Yeah, it's maybe the next layer of comfortableness, I want to say. Next layer of them being comfortable with each other.
Yeah, comfortability.
To be able to not just joke in kind of a obligatory way or a digging way where there's a kind of a little bit of a barb underneath it. No, this is just strictly a joke between them, a casual, lighthearted comment between them that has none of that underlying current to it. It's just, hey, you know what? You've got me. I'm doing nothing. It feels kind of weird, but I mean, yeah, I can do it.
She has a sudden need to balance her checkbook.
Speaking of books, whatever happens about the Remington Steele book?
Yes, speaking of books.
Because they signed the contract, I think.
I guess it just never happens. Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah. He was typing it up.
He agreed to it. Forsyth agreed to it.
I wonder if after Forsyth is revealed, after Steele reveals Tony to be the killer, that Forsyth realized that having a book written by Remington Steele might be more trouble than it's worth.
Very possibly, yes. He reveals all of your authors are killers.
Well, I mean, he basically killed the Charlotte Knight franchise. Like, if they've got nobody, Mitchell Knight is dead, and clearly Tony's never going to ghostwrite another book, so.
Yeah.
No sequel to Prone Positions.
Oh, so is that it? We're at the end.
I think it might be, unless there are any other notes or comments or
nothing that I've got.
Things to add aside from, of course, the website, which and of course there's the website www.SteeleWatching.com, show notes, links to our Amazon US and Amazon Canada, and if you use them to buy The Shining or A Tale of Two Cities, because we've put in Charles Dickens there as well as a direct reference, we get a small commission off that, which is a way for you to help the show. Other social media resources and links such as
the official SteeleWatching Facebook and Twitter and Instagram pages. You will find links to take you to those from our website.
Yeah,
yes.
those.
And a link to the Steele Watchers fan group on Facebook, which is the semi-official but totally unofficial home group of the Steele Watching podcast.
It's where all the cool kids are.
Yes. Can I jump back to the Amazon thing real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
One of the reasons that we went with the Amazon links is because we did not want to turn this into a begathon. Send us money, send us money, send us money. There are ongoing expenses associated with having a podcast. And any kind of income we can generate from these Amazon links will help cover those costs. By doing the Amazon links, people are able to get something for their money that is also helping us, and it doesn't cost them anything extra. But Amazon does have some little gotchas on there. And if people don't know the gotchas, then if they're trying to make purchases using our links to help us and they don't do them correctly, we get nothing out of it. Once you click on that link, last version of the rules I knew of was that you needed to purchase it within 24 hours and you needed to purchase it through the web browser that opens when you click on the link. If you put it in your cart and come back to it within the next 24 hours and purchase it through your browser, it's all good. If you put it in your cart and you go to your Amazon mobile app to purchase it, it doesn't count anymore. So when you're going to do these, if you are going to do these, if you can use the buy it now or just immediately purchase it through your browser that opens up when you click on the link, that will ensure that we do get those commissions. Otherwise, you get a great movie or a great book and it didn't cost you anything extra, but we didn't get anything out of it, because most companies, if they can avoid paying something, they're going to. So they've got these rules.
No, really?
Yeah, it's amazing. Companies don't want to pay out money for things if they can avoid it.
It's crazy.
Silly. Anyway, so enough of the commercial there. Yeah, I guess that's it, unless you have anything else. And if you don't, then the only thing left to do is say that our next episode is going to be Your Steele, the One for Me. And we'll see you then.
We will.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.